on the causes and conditions of both happiness and suffering, and particularly on the suffering of sentient beings. These contemplations cannot be short-circuited, and they must be delved into with everything you have. Then once that happens, you begin to feel a certain kind of determination and motivation, and it begins to make sense. I mean, that's really what happened to me. Before I even felt a kind of determination, I remember my first feeling as I was practicing, and this was way back when I was 20. I had not even actually met with the path of Dharma yet, but in my own meditation and dream state, I was actually given these contemplations directly, and so I began to practice them. What happened to me was not so much this determination, but it was more like kind of like it's the only thing that makes sense. I mean, if you really logic it out, if you really think that here you are, one sentient being, on our planet alone, in the human realm alone, there are roughly 5 billion others. On our planet alone, there are uncountable animal forms. We can't even count them. I mean, you can't even count the amount of, say, ants in an anthill. Each one of them is a sentient being, with the Buddha nature within them, just as surely as you have. Yet they appear in this form due to their own habitual tendency and the way that their consciousness is functioning at this time. How many uncountable sentient beings that can be seen with the eye on this planet alone? In the Buddha's teachings, we are told there are 3,000 myriads of universes. 3,000 myriads of universes. And that's just like one number you can get that can give you some understanding that we're talking big. Plus, the Buddha also teaches us there are all these formless realms. And there are uncountable sentient beings in these formless realms. So logically, if I spend my entire life in ego gratification and self-cherishing, and yet my nature is this Buddha nature, completely inseparable from the very Lord that I call Buddha, completely inseparable from all these sentient beings. That nature is indistinguishable from one being to another. It is logical and reasonable that I would do everything I can to bring benefit to others. It is logical and reasonable also to me that I will never be happy until every sentient being is free. That's what seemed reasonable to me. If this is my nature, this absolute Buddha nature, this ground of being, if this is it, and you are that also, and yet we appear in these multitudinous forms, wandering and suffering in samsara, it makes perfect sense to me to dedicate my life to the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings. Nothing else seems logical or reasonable. And from that, gradually, this determination grew. But I went through the mental discipline, and I went through it. I practiced for 8 to 10 hours only on those contemplations for about 10 months a day, till I could see clearly for myself that this is the only game in town that makes sense. To live any other kind of life seemed to me like, well, for me it felt like whoring. To know what I know and then not live the way I know I should live seemed like prostitution or whoring. And it didn't seem reasonable to me. And so my determination was born. Now, once you have that kind of understanding, don't think that you don't have to go through the process of reminding yourself and keeping it alive every step of the way. If any of you have been married, you know that once you take the vow, that's not the end of the issue. If you want to remain in that kind of situation, you've got to go through hell and high water. And you have to really work at it, or the marriage doesn't work. Well, it's like that in giving rise to the Bodhicitta. Once you've come to the conclusion, the great conclusion, That's not where the effort stops. You have to do it every day. It's this part of the discipline of practice, and you have to remind yourself, remind yourself every day so that you remained mindful. And on the path of Dharma, these contemplations are crucial. So this is how it starts. It starts in mental discipline, which gives rise to determination. Where's emotion in all that? Emotion becomes kind of dumb, sort of inconsequential, you know? I mean, once you realize that there are 5 million humans that you know of that are wandering in samsara, not understanding how to create the causes of happiness, whether you have gas at that moment or, whether you feel like you're in a good mood or bad mood or any of those kinds of things becomes sort of like a moot point. I mean, like, well, so what? And it's okay, and also you learn that in order to be comfortable on the path of the Bodhisattva, it's also okay to be a Bodhisattva in a bad mood. But you don't get to stop, you see? Because you've learned something, you know. So here you are in a position where this is really terrific, because as a Westerner, we want to make bodhicitta about feeling. Feelings, nothing more than feelings. You know that song? I wish they'd never written it. Because somehow it's gotten into our consciousness as Americans, and we're singing this tune. We just believe in it. Hook, line, and sinker. So once we realize that it's not about a feeling nature, when we give rise to the bodhicitta, we also, at that moment, and here's a magic golden key, can be more tolerant with ourselves and more comfortable on the path. And we can still consider ourselves practitioners of the bodhicitta if we're in a bad mood. Do bodhisattvas ever get PMS? Yes, they do. I can tell you that for a fact. Do bodhisattvas ever wake up feeling like they got off on the wrong side of the bed and they are not going to be happy and they are determined not to? Yes, they do. Do bodhisattvas ever get sick to death of everything? Yes, they do. Do bodhisattvas ever wish that everybody was okay in samsara and maybe we could just like ride off into the sunset and do exactly everything we want? Oh, Lordy, yes, they do. Bodhisattvas feel all of those ways, but they have that practice and that knowledge and that determination. And once you learn that, and do not expect that, and do not try to make your compassion about a certain feeling or appearance or some ridiculous, stupid, flush-it verbiage about love and light. Once you let go of that idea, then maybe you can be comfortable on your path. Maybe you can still be a bodhisattva when you have PMS. Because you don't get time off for that, I'm afraid to tell you. Sentient beings are still suffering, whether you have it or not. And so you mature on the path, and you become a big kid on the path, a mature practitioner who knows that human frailties are human frailties, and we all have them. We're walking around with arms and legs and human bodies, and we feel the way we feel. But what has that got to do with the need of sentient beings? And our determination, therefore, through really studying and practicing in this way, should remain firm and strong. And for me, I have my really bad moments, and yet I have to say that every time I have a bad moment when I just don't feel like it, I learn and I respect and I understand the condition of sentient beings. I mean, if you didn't have those feelings once in a while, you wouldn't even know what it was you were up against, would you? It's almost like that's part of who you are. So be comfortable with that. And don't let it determine how you engage on the path. If anything, let it make you even more determined. It's okay to be exactly who you are and a bodhisattva. So mechanically, how do you actually begin? Well, like I said, you begin wherever you are, with self-honesty, determining exactly what your habit patterns are, and acceptance. You have to be comfortable with yourself. A mature practitioner on the path is comfortable with themselves. They're not trying to act like a practitioner, which I have to tell you, you see a lot on the Dharma path. People trying to act like a practitioner. They have all these costumes and so forth. And yet, do they have the heart of the practitioner? Not much. Too much self-concern. Too much appearance. So, where do you start? Like I said, exactly where you are. Remember that different people have had different experiences. And if you're not sure about that, I don't know. Read, ask other people. Each of us have had different experiences. No one knows what another person's experience has actually been like or felt like. No one knows how karmic patterns develop into the tapestry that they do. Each and every being, as they engage on the path of the Bodhisattva, will look a little different. It's not for you to judge. It's only for you to begin. Some people, when they first begin to engage in the meditations that the Bodhisattva needs to engage in, they'll be doing it like, so, I dedicate myself to the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings. Okay, I do it. I don't feel like it today. I'm not happy about it today. But I dedicate my life to the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings. And I know it's the right thing to do. And okay, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. You know. And then the other person will say, oh yes, without any thinking, right now, I dedicate myself to the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings. Both are equally ridiculous. And it's not going to, I mean, why make a judgment about either thing? You can see that that's just the first step. And so whatever it looks like, let it be that. But again, honestly and truly, you constantly determine what you're like. And eventually, in maturity, there is not so much concern for appearances, not so much concern for how it should be. There is mostly concern for others. Now there's a new trick. Rather than concern of appearances, mostly concern for others. That's the part we left out, wasn't it? When we were judging ourselves and judging others for not looking perfect as a bodhisattva. It isn't about that. It's about them. It's about others. So we begin in the smallest way that we can. There are many different ways that one can actually engage and begin to train the mind as a bodhisattva. Actually, as a bodhisattva, the goal is to make every aspect of one's life a vehicle or like a basket of benefit for others. So what would that look like? Well, what about the ordinary things that you do? Now here's another thing that Westerners do. They divide their lives into sections, pigeonholes. You know, there's the holy part, and there's the ordinary part, you know, where you have your regular personality and you are the way you are to your husband, wife, and kids, and in-laws, and all those people that know you better than anybody. And then we have the other part of your life where you're out on the street and people get to see you and you have your street face on. And then you have the personal part, you know, you go to the bathroom and you do all these things. And you have the intellectual part, and you have the part that goes to the movies, and you have the part that exercises, and all these different parts. And none of them, because we're so deluded, seem to have much relationship to each other. It's like we're juggling cats all the time. We have all these different elements in our life. One of the things as a bodhisattva that you have to do is to make your entire life a basket, a vehicle for this compassion. So how do you do that? Well, there are these kind of like walking mindfulness meditations that you can do that are extremely beneficial. And they actually, you'll find, if you find yourself moving into a depression or some sort of negative mood, I've found that they'll pull you right out of it. If you really try to practice some sort of absorption with it. Very simple. You don't have to sit down and do the holy thing. You don't have to do any of that, or you don't even have to put on your Dharma clothes or pick up your pretty beads and, you know, wear your particular medallions that show you're a cool guy. You don't have to do any of that. All you have to do is, oh, I don't know, let's say eat lunch. And as you're eating lunch, you would pick up a spoonful of the food and you would say, as I am nourished, and you would be like a prayer, just a quiet prayer within your heart, like a loving prayer. As I take this nourishment into my body, may all sentient beings be nourished by the light and power of Bodhicitta. As I take this drink into my body, may all sentient beings be watered and nurtured, let's say, by the nectar of Dharma. And this is like a heartfelt wish. As you walk through the door, may all sentient beings be led through the door of liberation and their suffering be ended by the virtue of my walking through this door. And so it's a constant mindfulness meditation. As I walk down the street, may all sentient beings walk down the path to liberation. As I am in my car and I'm looking, at a map trying to find those crazy Washington streets and where they go, by the virtue of this, activity, may all sentient beings receive the proper guidance and direction by which they can accomplish Dharma and be free. And so everything that you engage in, so you have a choice here. You can be cussing like a trooper and hating the way DC is laid out with all those weird tunnels and all that junk, and looking at the map and just, doing all of the Washington thing that people do around here. Or you can be utilizing that opportunity. Well, you're going to be looking at the map and finding the street anyway. So instead of getting into the mood that would normally get you into, perhaps you can use that as an opportunity to have kind of like an understanding that all sentient beings are directionless and hungry for direction. And so a small prayer at that moment, that all sentient beings would be guided on the path to liberation, is appropriate and beneficial. And I've found that it organizes your mind and thoughts, and the mindfulness becomes so profound and so clarifying in the mind that almost anything you're doing at that time is better, takes on more meaning, is happier, and can be better done. It's like the mind is more clear, less filled with the kinds of hyper emotions that make us crazy and confused. And that kind of meditation, that kind of consideration for the well-being of others, everything, as I ascend the staircase, may all sentient beings ascend into the true meaning of Dharma. And, you're free to make up your own prayer. It doesn't have to be my prayer. Make up your own concerning the welfare of sentient beings. And you constantly walk around like that. You'll find that not only are you changing somehow in some subtle way that you can't understand, but you have less bad moods, less depression, less frequent, overwhelming concern with your ego to the point where you are busy doing nothing but manipulating everything and everybody around you in order that they will get it right for you, which is pretty much how we live. And so that kind of thing begins to change. And you're less concerned with manipulating your environment in order to get what you want. And you're less often accomplishing the great mantra of gimme, 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 I wanna, hung pet. And you're more concerned with the welfare of others. And something inside of you is beginning to change. And remember, during the retreat, those of you that were here, I talked about that our habitual tendency is so strongly biased toward ego cherishing that really we have to spend a lot of time putting something in this pile in order to bring it back into some kind of balance. And so that kind of meditation really brings about that kind of balance. And it begins to put more in the pile of concern for others, and your habit begins to change. Because there's nothing about you that inherently goes towards non-lovingness or lack of concern for others. You are actually the bodhicitta in your essence. But it is your habitual tendency, karmic cause and effect relationships that bring about habitual tendency, and the weight of that karma that weighs down on this side. Now we're looking to balance the scales. And so this kind of meditation changes your habitual tendency so that you find magically the next time you want to take that bodhisattva vow in the context of your practice, you're feeling different. It's not really an emotional thing, but somewhere inside of you, you sense, you feel that something's changed because, number one, you have the good feeling of really having invested a great deal of your time in this discipline of meditation for the sake of others. And number two, most importantly, your habitual tendency is starting to change. So next time you say, I dedicate myself to the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings, you'll find that as you say that, there's a catch in your voice, in your heart, almost like, oh, is it real? Do I feel it? Yes, it's there. You'll know that it's beginning to take hold in your heart. And when you really, really feel that deeply, you'll begin to feel the benefit and happiness associated with this practice. Now don't get off on that and get lost in, oh, I'm so happy, now I'm a great Bodhisattva, now I can look like a saint, roll those eyes, take out a pint of blood, I'm looking too robust. Don't get lost in the concept. Only continue. Only continue with the practice for the sake of sentient beings. Do not get lost in the circus. Remember, make it always about them. And ultimately you will come to understand in maturity in your practice, that your own enlightenment and the enlightenment of others is non-dual and equal in weight. Equal in weight. And here's the real reason why. Even though there are so many more other sentient beings who are wandering in samsara, and I, or you, am only one, still, although one can bring about temporary or relative benefit as a human being, one can actually not bring about extraordinary or ultimate benefit until oneself actually achieves realization. So for that reason, we are so dedicated to bringing about our own liberation for their sake. We view it as non-dual with the liberation of others. As I reach liberation, as I move closer to enlightenment, I am more and more able to be of benefit to others. And so I am interested in my own spiritual practice, interested in my enlightenment for their sake, as well as my own, of course. I am one of them. They become non-dual, and we begin to understand that we are truly and utterly inseparable, in essence and in truth. So, we begin by walking with these simple, mindful meditations. Now, don't get obsessive about it. If you forget to do it for an hour, a day, it's like anything else. You just climb back on. The judgment is useless. You can toss it out. What is needed, what you should cultivate, is the ability to view yourself honestly. But self-hatred has no place on this path. Hatred of any kind has no place on this path. So that kind of ridiculous judgment, I would prefer that you do not judge me as a bodhisattva to need to look or act a certain way, and I would prefer that you do not judge yourself as a budding bodhisattva to look or act a certain way, and thereby condemn and end your potency on the path. So don't do it to me, and don't do it to you. You won't catch me doing it to me or you. Your concern then is not appearances, but it is of loving kindness. So as you begin to practice more and more deeply and you move through these meditations, remember, you've done the contemplations that I've described, such as on the faults of cyclic existence, and all of those contemplations that I described earlier in this very teaching. And then you move through the mindfulness and the daily, walking the path, walking your talk as a bodhisattva. You move from that. And I'm describing in very ordinary terms, mechanically, what it looks like. And then more and more, as you're doing that, you will find that as you practice ngundro, or as you do any practice part of which is always the taking of the refuge and bodhicitta vows that's inherent in any practice on this path. As you get to that point in your practice, it will have depth and meaning for you that it never could have had before. And it becomes very profound. And particularly if you are accumulating the ngundro and are repeating that vow of bodhicitta 100,000 times, which is what we do over and over again over a long period of time. When you do that meditation, you're not simply saying it and holding the visualization that is prescribed, but you are in some kind of natural absorption in this vow and its profound meaning. And then you grow in that even more, and you remain in a natural absorption in bodhicitta while you're practicing. This is a very important stage in one's practice. And it doesn't happen naturally. And again, do not mistake emotions for that moment. Do not mistake some crazy idea of self-contrived bliss, of love and light, for that moment. That moment is based on the hard work that I've described and nothing less. It is based on mental discipline. That absorption is a meditation state, and when that occurs, we have been taught that when one actually takes the Bodhisattva vow with Vajra courage and determination and true absorption, then most of one's gross defilements that have been accumulated since time out of mind are instantly dissolved. Isn't that amazing? Because the weight of truly remaining absorbed in the bodhicitta is such a strong virtue that it weighs very heavy on that scale. It weighs very heavy. But now we're talking about true absorption. We are not talking about contrived emotionalism, which most of you have substituted. This is different. And it takes this discipline, and it takes honesty and courage. But once that happens, the major gross defilements, and this is according to the teachings, are pacified. Once you have truly experienced that absorption, you will begin to feel a change. But again, don't fixate on that change, and don't make it the thing. Don't get emotional about it. Don't get lost in the concept, because the minute you do, you are no longer absorbed in the vow. It's about you. So remain firm with a stable mind, absorbed in the great bodhicitta. Now we still have the subtle defilements to work out, those habitual tendencies and so forth. And we will work them out by practicing in this way. But this is where it starts. Now let's see, what else? Oh, furthermore, you should, at this point, as you're beginning to practice the true absorption in the bodhicitta, then at this point you might find that you're naturally examining aspects of your life that cannot coexist anymore. You find that there are many things that have to change, and it's not to say that these things aren't challenging and difficult. For instance, as a bodhisattva, how can you just, with no mindfulness whatsoever in the way that we have been accustomed to, will step on a bug or slap a mosquito? Now we know that these creatures are not so different from us, that each within them is the Buddha nature as well. That they are sentient beings wandering in samsara, and like us, they wish to be happy, but do not know how to create the causes of happiness. So now we have all the, difficulties that are associated with being a bodhisattva. You got to take that mosquito, and you become really expert at trapping it under a glass and getting the paper underneath there and carrying it outside and going, "Oh, Mani Padme Hum" first, and all these little things. And people look at you like, geez, that's a little excessive, isn't it? But, you do it, and that's your thing. And it becomes, it can be a pain. But at the same time, you have these mindfulness meditations. And after you have really remained absorbed in these teachings and remained absorbed in the Bodhisattva vow, you don't really have the heart to step on anything. It just seems like such a defilement of everything that you know and hold dear. And a lot of things about your life begin to change. What was okay before doesn't seem okay now, does it? Suddenly it's just not so okay. It leaves a bad taste in your mouth. So go with this change and reinforce yourself and be glad about it, even if it makes things a little inconvenient sometimes. Because these are the first actual baby steps of compassion arising within our minds on a relative human level. And these are to be treasured. These thoughts, these ideas are to be treasured rather than to be thought of as a burden. So now, then officially, once you begin to have these experiences, your life as a bodhisattva has begun. The vow of refuge, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, this is a vow that one must take every single lifetime. That one must renew this vow every lifetime. But the power of the bodhisattva vow is so strong that the power and potency of that vow lives from lifetime to lifetime. You, if you have taken that vow, have that vow from now until you cross through the door of liberation into nirvana. And you must pray every day that you will be guided in this life and in every future life to meet with the means by which you will be able to practice this great compassion. Now everything about your life must seem different. The prejudices we had before about different peoples and different races and different religions and so forth, how can it make sense now? The ideas that we had about class and how this person is better than that person because of the class that they're in, or how one person is superior because of their superior intellect. Having tasted one moment of bodhicitta, you realize that a superior intellect is a fool's toy in a fool's world, unless it can be used to bring about that pure absorption. Everything changes, and slowly, slowly, so do you. So even if you are that person that begins practicing the Bodhisattva's path by going, I dedicate the liberation and salvation of all sentient beings, that's not going to last for long. Accept yourself the way if that's where you're starting, start there. It's a simple truth. Just do it. And don't make such a big deal about it. That's a good mantra. Om, don't make a big deal, hung pat. Just don't make a big deal about it. Just start where you are. Gradually over time, this will stop. And you'll begin to feel that catch in your throat, that movement, that change, that begins to happen. And for other people, of course, there are different ways of beginning practice, different places that each one of you start at, but the rules fundamentally are the same. They are the same. One requires this mental discipline in order to truly practice the bodhicitta, practice the contemplations, practice the daily mindfulness. And then in the practice, the repetition of the vow of the bodhicitta, begin to remain absorbed in this idea, in the reality of the bodhicitta, and remain absorbed in the stability of mind that one experiences when one is not busy manipulating and grasping. This is real progress on the path, real progress. Much more so than talking the Dharma talk and walking the Dharma walk and doing the Dharma rep. Developing a good heart at last. This is real result, and it is lasting. You won't be able to take your Dharma talk and your Dharma rap and your Dharma scene and your Dharma clothes and your Dharma Dudley do-rights or whatever, or anything that you have accomplished in this lifetime into the next rebirth. You will not be able to take any of that into the bardo, but a good heart and Vajra compassion, yes, you take that into the next life, and it is one of the main causes for the conditions of your next rebirth. This is valuable. This is your treasure. This heart of the Bodhisattva. And it is the first step to a truly happy life. And we get really happiest at it when we are completely surrendering. Letting that love, that concern for the welfare of others, that bodhicitta, be the captain of our ship. Not that nasty little manipulative, self-serving ego that's running around trying to control everything and making everybody, including ourselves, crazy. We will find that the level of neuroses in our lives begins to go down. And we will find that, lo and behold, just like the Buddha taught, we have really begun to create the causes for happiness. It really works. It really works. There are changes that you'll go through, changes that I go through constantly, even still. You may find that happiness does not take the form you thought it was going to take. But let me tell you something. I'm 46 years old. If you have come anywhere near my aged self and haven't figured out that life is not going to do what you thought it was going to do anyway, then you have been asleep at the wheel. Why not make it work for you? Because nothing is going to take the form you thought it was going to, no matter what you do. Most particularly if you spend your time trying to control and manipulate others, and if you live a life completely concerned with ego cherishing. Then life really won't deliver. But hey, that's all part of growing up. I mean, in maturity, we see that. Your 5-year plans, your 10-year plans, forget it. I mean, I guess about some aspects of your life you can do that, but you will find that as the bodhicitta begins to truly manifest in your life, it requires true surrender. And your life will not take the form that you thought it was going to. Because this bodhicitta cannot be controlled. It is not a toy for you to make you happy exclusively. It is the display of that nature that is our ground of being and to which we are all equally entitled and ultimately responsible for. And as you begin to taste that nectar and realize that in all the worlds sentient beings are suffering, and in worlds and worlds that we cannot see, sentient beings are suffering, and that we have in our hands, like a precious jewel or a golden key, the means by which some understanding or some help can come to them. So let us now commit our lives and remain absorbed in that kindness and transform this present life and every future life into a vehicle by which the end of suffering will be brought about and all sentient beings will be liberated. So this is the teaching, and this is our wish. And I hope from the depth of my heart that each one of you will take this home and consider it very carefully, and then make the choice for transformation. We hate that word, transformation, the scary T word. We sort of like it in theory. It sounds so dynamic and powerful. But when, let's say, for instance, astrologically, someone says to you, well, you're about to go through a major transformation, we go, ah! We are terrified. Quick, batten down the hatches. Don't let anything change. But if you've lived long enough, you'll find out that life is going to transform you one way or the other. You will go through transformations. You will go through things. So go through that which will benefit you and all sentient beings. Do not leave this continent of precious jewels empty-handed. When you go into your next life, I hope to the depth of my heart that you have somehow managed to take the nectar from this life and truly internalize it and enter into your next life nurtured by the power of Bodhicitta. So that's our class for today, and I hope very much that you have enjoyed it and that you will listen and act accordingly. And if it changes only one moment of your life and makes only that moment predisposed towards selfless activity, well, then we've accomplished that. So thank you very much.
One